Hello everybody, my name is Kai and welcome back to Warframe. I hope you're all doing well because today we are doing a bit of a different style video than the ones that I normally post. That being a top 10 best weapons for the Steel Path. Now before we get started, I just do want to say that this is purely subjective and totally my own opinion. Obviously these are not the only good weapons for Steel Path, but these are what I feel are the top 10 best ones that I currently use pretty often. So obviously if you feel like you have something better, let me know down in the comments below and maybe I'll do a video on it. But let's just get right into it, why don't we? First up, we have one of the strongest primaries in the entire game, the Fenmore. Being an incarnate weapon, it means that it does have two forms. The stronger of that being its incarnate form, obviously, which turns it into an arc gun-like minigun. This form absolutely chews through all enemies on the Steel Path, including Eximus units and the Acolytes, kind of like the rest of the weapons on this list though. To acquire the Fenmore, just go to Cavallero and the Chrysalith on the Zeramin, and the build requirements for it are fairly cheap. You can also buy the blueprints to skip the rep grind, but you only need to be rank 2. Being an incarnate weapon, obviously it has its evolutions. Now the first one just grants you access to the incarnate form, but evolution 2, Void's Guidance, is my preference here. Accuracy and less recoil while aiming is probably the best perk in this tree, as the rest of them give menial buffs. Evolution 3 gives magazine capacity. Now none of Evolution 3's buffs affect the incarnate form in any way, and having more magazine capacity to be able to get up that incarnate meter with the base form is something that I like. Evolution 4 on the other hand grants plus 20% status chance in return for a negative on our critical chance. Now you might be asking, why do we want less crits? But that is mainly because of the Fenmore's 5th evolution perk, Devouring Attrition. Devouring Attrition states that you have a 50% chance to deal plus 2000% damage on non-critical hits. So obviously, lessening our chances of getting crits means more damage on the Fenmore. Because we are not building for crit here, we do not feature any of the crit focus mods such as critical delay, hunting munitions, or other things like vital sense. Now we do build full into fire rate through the use of vile acceleration and prime shred. Prime shred is great because it adds punch through to the Fenmore, which already has a decent amount of it. This turns it into an absolute monster for crowds and means that it just mows down big groups of enemies with absolute ease. To do this even easier, we do build for corrosive and heat on the Fenmore. We also do use serration here because of how the Fenmore's 5th evolution perk interacts with base damage. Combining those two with primary deadhead and galvanized aptitude allows us to get a huge multiplier of our damage because of its 5th evolution perk, which is multiplicative. The Fenmore is one of the best weapons in the entire game, and I 100% recommend you go pick it up for yourself as soon as possible. Next up, we have Lavos' signature shotgun, the Sado. Now, the Sado is one of the strongest weapons in the entire game, and you're going to hear that a lot in this video because all of these weapons are super strong. That is because, if you know the mod Condition Overload for melees, the Sado has that built into the gun by default, not requiring things like Galvanized Savvy or anything, but those do help. It is just baked in by default, and it also has a very special alt fire. The primary fire is fully automatic and functions exactly how you would expect a shotgun in Warframe to do, but the alt fire is where things get interesting. The alt fire launches a glaive that has very high status chance and at base can proc all 4 of the base elements on enemies. This is very important because, like I said earlier, the Sado has built-in condition overload, which means it does more damage to enemies that have multiple status types affecting them. Obviously, we have more damage against that target than we do this one because she had 4 status effects. The mods that we're going to use on our Sado today are pretty simple. We use Galvanized Hell for more multi-shot, but Galvanized Savvy I actually don't recommend. Galvanized Savvy does exactly what the Sado already does, give more damage depending on the status effects affecting the target. These do not stack very well together, which is why I would recommend using a Bane mod in its place, but critical deceleration for the crit chance, and prime ravage obviously for critical damage. Shotgun Barrage gives us fire rate, which is a nice to have on the Sado, while Toxic Barrage and Frigid Blast give us the viral status and also give us a lot more elemental status chance, bringing the glaive up to 150. Obviously that does include Galvanized Savvy's 80% though. Hunter Munitions also does feature here because we're using viral. We obviously want Slash, and Primary Merciless for the Arcane. The Sado is one of my most used weapons, and that's for a reason. I know I don't show it here, but this weapon can easily do level cap, as its damage just continues to scale as you add more status effects, which means that with things like an outside primer, it only gets better. And also, if you get triggered by my pronunciation of Sado, by not saying like Sidu or Sado, like whatever, be mad. Like, you can say it both ways, alright? You know how many comments I've gotten about that? But again, Sado, absolutely fantastic shotgun. If you don't have it, you definitely want to get it. Our first melee on the list, if you can even really call it a melee, is the Glaive Prime. I'm sure this was a shocker to no one, but the Glaive Prime is seriously, like I keep saying, one of the best weapons in the entire game. This thing and its power is absolutely unmatched. Pairing it up with the right mods and, you know, proper primers and all that stuff, this, disgusting. Now the glaive is, well, a glaive, which means that besides from being able to melee like other weapons and do all these cool animations that no one has ever seen, you can also throw it. And when you throw it, there are a couple things you can do. One, you can just throw it at enemies and it will do damage, but the fancy thing about it is the fact that you can explode it when you press your heavy attack button mid-air. Now this explosion is very strong because it has a guaranteed slash proc, which against these enemies absolutely demolishes them because slash ignores enemy armor. I think this is also a reason why the glaive is so popular, because it is literally so easy to use. On a frame like Zephyr, I just jump around, hold down my melee button, and then every time I just detonate it by pressing my heavy attack button, and it just kills things, which is very impressive. And it also happens to be one of the best Acolyte killers in the entire game. Now, if for some reason my glaive didn't get messed up here and then I proceeded to completely bot out, I would have killed him much quicker, but you can see that a single throw and detonate took out pretty much 90% of his health. Building our glaive, this is a heavy attack build, so we do use Corrupt Charge to give us initial combo, which increases our heavy attack damage. Killing Blow on the build also increases the melee wind-up speed on the heavy attack and the heavy attack damage. Now our critical stats on this build come from Organ Shatter and Gladiator Might. Use Amalgam Organ Shatter if you have it, as it also increases heavy attack wind-up, which is something that makes the glaive feel a lot better to use. Our critical chance on this build comes from Sacrificial Steel, as it gives us a total of 440% for heavy attacks. Prime Pressure Point also gives us that base melee damage, and then Smite Corrupted is used because we are getting slash procs, so we do want to double dip on them with a Bane mod. Volatile Quick Return is also crucial to this build as it significantly increases KPM. With the mod on, your glaive will not bounce, and when you hit enemies without detonating, it will also explode. Now this explosion is not counted as a heavy attack, thus it will not proc the AoE slash effect that the heavy attack has, but what it will do is increase blast radius, and this is very noticeable as it allows you to take out much larger groups of enemies much quicker. To increase your damage when using this mod, even if by slightly, let the glaive hit enemies or a floor and explode and then proc the heavy attack. Now this does take a little bit of muscle memory, but it will increase your damage and also does get a little bit more status effects on your enemies in the immediate area. Next up, we have Revenant's signature shotgun, if you can even really call it a shotgun, the Phantasma. Now the Phantasma is very strong, like every weapon on this list, but it is strong in a different way than the last one. If you watch the gameplay in the background, you'll notice that I am barely hitting any crits, but what I am doing is applying lots of status effects, specifically heat, and I am applying those heat procs very fast. While it is classified as a shotgun, it definitely does not function like one, shooting out 6 continuous beams of energy, which means that yes, it does have an innate multi-shot of 6. Against enemies, these beams do have infinite punch through, and paired with the Phantasma's lightning quick reload, which does complement its very small mag size, means that you will have absolutely no issue dealing with large crowds. Right there with the Phantasma's ult fire, you can charge up a sort of grenade, but it's kind of a meme that no one uses. The Phantasma's ridiculously high base status chance is what makes it so great, paired with its very high base multi-shot, which gets even higher when using a galvanized mod. This paired with its innate radiation makes it an absolute monster for status damage. The best of those status effects being heat. Building for maximum heat on the Phantasma through the use of all 3 heat mods on shotguns means the most damage, as stacking up 100 heat procs will do a lot. Now Galvanized Savvy here is the only one I would recommend swapping out for something else like a Bane mod, but I do use a Riven on this build, which is why I would have polarity issues. You can also build a Phantasma for viral instead of corrosive, but personally, I find that the both of them perform very similarly. Obviously do use a Bane mod on the viral one though. KPM wise, I find that they are very similar, with the corrosive one slightly edging out over viral at base steel path, but the viral one will obviously scale better. They are still both monsters for crowds though. The one thing the Phantasma cannot do though is kill Acolytes very well, and that's because it deals its damage through status effects. Now obviously here it is doing damage, but compared to the rest of the weapons on this list, it should definitely not be your Acolyte killer. Next up, we have one of my favorite weapons in the entire game, the Red Crit Monster, the best bow, and I do mean that better than the Brahma, the Notaruk. This bow is one of the highest damaging weapons in the entire game, clearing crowds with ease and making it look very, very fun and easy, because with it, it really is. Now, even though it is a bow, it does have a very special mechanic. Firing in the last 1/3 of the charge, but not fully charging the bow, will give you a perfect shot. Now, this perfect shot has some ridiculous stats, much higher than the rest, and push this weapon way too far. Now, both the charge shot and the perfect shot possess infinite body punch through, which again makes the Notaruk a monster for crowds, and also give it a very wide projectile size, sort of like the Tenet Archoplasmor. My preferred way of building the Nadaruk is for raw corrosive damage through the use of high voltage and malignant force. If you wanted to increase this, you could use the 90% versions, but I have polarity issues because the Nadaruk at 0 forma comes with 4 V polarities, which is fantastic. It means that you literally don't need to invest anything at all into this weapon. Now, I do like to use Galvanized Scope, paired with Primary Deadhead to give us lots of damage. This also synergizes nicely with Bladed Rounds, which does require you to aim, and means that you shoot enemies, you get massive red crit numbers, and one-tap pretty much everything. Prime Shred also reduces the charge time on the bow pretty significantly, but not enough that it makes it hard to get the perfect shots, and again, this bow is just absolutely ridiculous. And it gets even better when you pair it up with grouping abilities like Ensnare. Ensnare from Korra turns the infinite body punch that the Nadaruk has up to 11, because now you get to pull in big groups of enemies and one-shot every single one of them. Next up, we actually have 2 weapons, those being the Praetos and the Epitaph. The reason that I am deciding to showcase these two together is because the Praetos are a melee weapon. Melee weapons have the Condition Overload mod, which increases damage based on status effects on an enemy, and the Epitaph is a secondary pistol that is a primer. The Praetos are an Incarnate weapon, which means they obviously have evolutions. Now, the first of these evolutions is again access to the Incarnate form, but now you need to build a combo to get into it. You must achieve 5x combo with the Praetos to get into their Incarnate form, but once you do, all you must do is heavy attack to activate it and you will gain a plethora of buffs. These buffs last for 90 seconds and include 2 meters more of range and an attack speed buff of 40%. These buffs in the Incarnate form make it very easy to skip out on some mods like attack speed, as the Praetos naturally have very high attack speed and the plus 40% of the Incarnate form is just the icing on top. But besides being a very good set of Tonfas that can match the Cronin Prime and KPM, what pushes the Praetos farther than that in my opinion are its second and fourth evolutions. Its second giving you 20% sprint and slide speed, while its fourth giving you parkour velocity. For those of you who wonder how I move so fast in some of my videos, showcasing without the Praetos on, all of your parkour moves like slides and rolls and bullet jumps look pretty average, but when you use the Praetos, you gain a bonus to all of those. Suddenly your character sprints and rolls and slides faster, and the bullet jumps especially are very noticeable. It just makes the movement a lot more smooth and fun in my opinion, as you just go faster and farther much quicker. But for those of you who want an actual build to use the Praetos, make sure you are using Sovereign Outcast as your stance, as it is by far the best of all of them. We are building for corrosive on the Praetos themselves, and that does relate to the very high slash weighting that it has, even though the corrosive elemental is much higher here. Primed Reach also features, because even though the Praetos has very good range in its Incarnate form, Primed Reach makes it an absolute monster for crowds. And we do get our crit chance from Blood Rush at max rank and max stacks. Building combo with the Praetos is very easy to give you 440%. Critical damage comes from Organ Shatter and Gladiator Might giving even more critical chance, Smite Corrupted for those slash procs as well. If our base damage is coming from Condition Overload, how are we going to get that? And that brings us to the second weapon here, the Epitaph. The reason I'm deciding to show the Epitaph alongside the Praetos, as mentioned before, is because it is mainly used as a primer weapon. Primers are weapons that are, well, mainly used to make other weapons better. In this case, through the Condition Overload mod. Now, Condition Overload gives more base damage the more status effects on an enemy, so a weapon like the Epitaph, which is an AoE weapon that also has very high status chance, is great for this. But that doesn't mean that the Epitaph cannot put in some serious work. With the right build on the Epitaph, you can do ridiculously high amounts of damage, but it just isn't its main use. The main build that I like to use with the Praetos specifically, because of their high slash weighting, is Viral and Radiation. Now, Viral is great because it increases the damage of the Praetos' slash procs significantly while also being a status for Condition Overload. Radiation also crowd controls enemies, which means any enemies that are primed will not be shooting back at you. Lethal Torrent and Anemic Agility allow you to spam the hell out of your Epitaph. The negative in damage is not a big deal. And then Barrel Diffusion is better than Galvanized Diffusion because we are not getting kills with any version of priming on the Epitaph. Sure Shot gives us even more status chance to push it to 215, and Secondary Dexterity gives damage and combo duration. These two weapons combined together make both of them stand out in such a fantastic way, and Condition Overload melees with the Epitaph are some of the best Acolyte killers in the game as well. But the Epitaph can also be modded for many other things other than just the standard Viral Radiation. It is one of the best primers for the Heat Inherit system, so definitely add that one to your arsenal alongside the Praetos. Moving on to our next weapon, which is also another Incarnate weapon, we have the secondary pistol, the Latum. If you again want to even call this thing a pistol. The Latum is the best of all of the Incarnate weapons by a pretty huge margin, and this should make it very apparent as to why that is. Like both of the Incarnate weapons before it, it does have evolutions. Now I am using a funny pistol skin on it, but besides that, the first evolution is again, access to the Incarnate form. But before that, the base form of the Latum functions like a semi-automatic pistol that actually has really respectable damage, right here one-shotting most of these gunners. But as you can see, charging up the bar by getting headshots allows us to go into the Incarnate form, which turns it into an Exceltra, but literally better, and that is very apparent by these shots and these heavy gunners, as it one-taps pretty much all of them, and the AoE that this form has makes it one of the best crowd clearers on this list. Before we keep going, I just want to say that I have a video on every single one of the weapons showcased in this video, and you should definitely go check them out as it offers a much more in-depth look at all of them, which is kind of necessary. But getting back to the evolutions, Evolution 2 gives us less weapon recoil, which is great as the Latum has a high kick. Evolution 3 gives us reload speed on headshots, which is nice because it affects the transformation speed of the weapon. Evolution 4 also affects how long we're going to be in Incarnate form by making it more consistent to get into it. But the damage of this weapon comes from its 5th evolution perk, which is Overwhelming Attrition. Overwhelming Attrition grants you up to 1200% more base damage when you do not hit a crit or apply a status effect with a single shot. Now, I won't fault you for thinking that something like that is hard to upkeep, especially with the stats we have on this build, but it really isn't. This buff takes into account bullets from multi-shot, which means that we only need one of the 3 bullets fired from this Latum build to not crit or status, which on this enemy literally took 4 bullets to do. Building the Latum is also very easy as you build it as sort of a hybrid weapon. Now we are using Galvanized Diffusion here, but the reason we also do not include Galvanized Shot is because the Latum is an AoE weapon where most of its damage actually comes from the AoE radial attack. Compare the impact and the radial attack, and Galvanized Shot does not work on radial attacks. But besides that, we are building for a raw, corrosive, and heat damage build that does pair up nicely with radiation, and since there are not very many mods that you could use other than a Bane mod or Expel mod in this situation, I like to use this here. We do not need fire rate on the Latum 2 because I feel like too much fire rate means you burn your Incarnate meter too quick, and the fire rate that Lethal Torrent provides is perfectly fine. Now, over Creeping Bullseye and Target Cracker. Obviously use Prime Target Cracker if you have it, and if you want to rank up Prime Pistol Gambit, which Barrow was just selling, use that as it doesn't give a negative in fire rate. I just do not feel like it. All of those things add up to make one ridiculously strong secondary, easily the best secondary in the game by far. It is the definition of just point and click and have everything die, and for that reason, it's why it has become one of my most used secondaries when I finally decided to make a video on it a couple weeks ago, which again, I have videos on all of these weapons, so make sure you go check them out. Oh, and of course, it's really, really good at killing Acolytes, because why wouldn't it be? And on to our final weapon, which is again, another Incarnate weapon. We have the ridiculously strong shotgun, the Felarx. Another Incarnate means more evolutions, which means again, first evolution gives you access to the Incarnate form. But starting with the base form, it is a multi-pellet shotgun that has infinite body punch through. If you're not starting to notice a trend here, what are you watching? It is also a single slug reload, which means that you will reload a single bullet at a time, dumping our entire mag and then reloading. We can stop halfway through, reload it the whole way. Besides that, you can see here that it's clearly very, very strong. The Incarnate form of the Felarx, on the other hand, transforms it into a set of dual pistols that also have infinite body punch through, and while these can appear to look very good right now, there is a reason that the Felarx is typically referred to as the anti-Incarnate weapon. For some reason, DE gave the primary mode of the Felarx more damage than the secondary fire mode or the Incarnate form of it. There are also even more issues here, as the Felarx shares the Fenmore's 5th evolution perk, which states a 50% chance to deal plus 2000% damage on non-crits, and every single bullet of multi-shot in the base form of the Felarx has a chance to proc that plus 2000, but the Incarnate form has absolutely no base multi-shot, which makes it just worse as it has less chances to proc the ridiculously OP plus 2000% damage trait. Showcasing the reload fire rate perk, obviously at base, the fire rate isn't that terrible, but fully reloading the mag to get plus 100%, and this thing becomes an actual laser beam. Building the Felarx is also pretty easy. Galvanized Hell gives multi-shot, and multi-shot is really great on this weapon, like most other weapons, but specifically here because each individual pellet has a chance to proc devastating attrition. Galvanized Savvy is also very important on the Felarx, as its damage buff is multiplicative because of its multi-pellet nature. This significantly increases damage against targets that don't die in one hit anyways. Prime Tactical Pump at max rank obviously gives a lot of reload speed, and reload speed is damage on the Felarx because you will be spending so much time reloading, so definitely max this out if you want to. Ammo stock also increases your magazine capacity, which on this build gives more fire rate and also more bullets before you need to reload, obviously. We are building for corrosive with raw damage here, paired with cleanse Grenier, just because there are not really that many things you could put here. I thought that a Bane mod would be best because of its multiplicative nature. But anything besides this, yeah, I would be hard-pressed to find another option. And Blaze is here just because it gives heat damage. Now, if you would like to, you could use some of the other heat mods like Incendiary Coat because this gives a higher elemental bonus, but I could not fit it with the current polarity setup that I have. But this is the Felarch build, and it is it's very good. Primary Merciless is also kind of necessary over Deadhead because it decreases reload time, which is something you definitely want. Pair all these things together and you get one ridiculously powerful shotgun that makes light work of even the heaviest of targets. Now, I know some people do not like the reload gimmick of this weapon, but I get around this by, one, enjoying actually playing with it because an active playstyle is fun, but also using frames that kill with their abilities. One of my personal favorites is Protea because of her blaze turrets. As you are killing things with your Felarchs and you get to that point where you need to reload the magazine, you can throw out a blaze turret and their really high damage will keep up the kills while you reload, thus creating an infinite loop. And here's a clip of it one-shotting an Eximus through their overguard because why not? Like some before it, it also benefits heavily from grouping abilities due to its innate infinite body punch through. Just crazy, man. But I think that this video has been going on long enough. Those are my top weapons to use in the Steel Path. Again, like I said at the beginning of the video, this is purely subjective and not to be taken as a definitive list of things that are the best. While I do think that these are some of the best, obviously there are also other great weapons in this game, and I also have a video on every single one of these, so make sure you definitely go check them out. Minus the Paretos, which honestly is very, very simple to build, like any other melee to be honest. I have a video on all of them, so make sure you go give those a view. But I thank you so much for watching this. I hope that this was informative and taught you a little bit, and I appreciate every single one of you. We are on our way to 5,000. What a crazy thing to say. You guys are amazing, and I appreciate all of you guys so much. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.